So how many of you actually use Nginx? Most. Nice. Well, then some of this, the early part at least, is not going to be a real surprise. I kind of didn't figure so, but Nginx is an open source web server and more. We're actually calling it a web application accelerator because it does more than just the web service that it began as in 2002. So in 2002, Igor Sysoyev in Moscow, working for Rambler, which is Russia's equivalent of Google, decided he needed to figure out a way to solve a 10,000 concurrent session problem on 2002 hardware. And at the time, that was unheard of, and still is in some cases, depending on the software you use. So he set out to do this, and instead of attacking Apache or IIS or any of the other web servers that were out there directly, he decided to build one from scratch. So that was where we started in 2002, and the engineering team today still lives and works in Moscow. And we have, in 2011, incorporated, formed a business around this, and have started growing a US base of operations as well. So I do, in fact, work for Nginx, which is great because I get to go out and talk to a lot of people such as yourselves about Nginx and talk to some of the converted, show them the new features, the different features, the things that are being added, things they didn't know happen, which is what this talk is functionally about. 5 things I'm hoping you don't know. Some of you will have known some of them and some won't. But we also are growing a commercial product with support and services in the off chance any of your organizations want that. But basically, Nginx began as a web server and has continued to grow through load balancing, proxying, application service, intelligent routing, all sorts of fun stuff that we've got there. It can exist in your infrastructure in a lot of different ways, sometimes serving static files, sometimes as a layer 7 router, and other times doing caching, proxying, all sorts of fun stuff. As evidenced by the number of hands here, there are 143 million websites running Nginx today, and we do all sorts of things beyond just basic web service. So some of those 5 things I talked about are being used in 22% of the top million websites, and I got to go through all the fun numbers. And 37% of the top 1,000 websites. We've recently become the most used web server, web accelerator front end for the top 1,000 websites by traffic, which we're really proud of. So thank you all for those of you who work for the big sites, and thank you all for those of you who work for the little sites for using Nginx. But those 5 things I talked about, the things that I chose to talk about were some of the things that, of course, accelerate and improve your performance, because that's functionally where Nginx began. We really wanted to make the best possible experience for the customer, or Igor began wanting to make the best possible experience for the customer for the greatest value for the company. So that means that everything that the team does today is based on excellence in the software, so that we can make the lightest weight, most robust, fastest, and best possible accelerated delivery of web traffic in all its different forms. And it does that a lot of different ways. So the things that I'm going to cover, I want to know who uses them for these things so that I can also go through that. So who knows about compressing assets for delivery and using it? We've got one. Oh, that's it. Good. This is great. How about like stopping form spamming and rate limiting of things? Anybody use that? Sweet. I am on a roll. How about using it as a front end to protect Apache or likely servers like that from threat exhaustion? Oh, we got 3 or 4 now. Okay, so that one's less unknown. How about rewriting content inline? You've done all of them. It's not fair. Anybody else? Rewriting inline, a couple more. Okay, good. And how about online updates? You've done them, a couple of you. All right. So a few of you have done this, but it seems like I hit many things that most people hadn't known about. And then there's just a little bonus at the end, which is I can show you how to determine a nearly complete command for a configure script if you need to recompile or compile differently later. You know what you have now, and go ahead and move forward from there. So a few of you use this to compress data. There are two different ways that I pulled out to reduce bandwidth costs and reduce bandwidth delivery to clients. So two different things that we do. So there's the content compression with a Gzip module, and then there's also image resampling, which exists as a possibility. So in both of these cases, they're one of them, actually they're both modules that can be compiled in by choice. So the HTTP Gzip module provides for you Gzip compression of the assets that you're delivering through, and it can be done by MIME type, and it can actually also be Gzipping proxied content as well. So most of you then are also familiar with the contexts. So you have an HTTP or a server context, an HTTP context, and a location context, right? You guys understand the hierarchy of those and how they work? Enough nods, some nods, some nods. All right, so how many of you have used Apache then as well? Ah, okay, good. Many of you. Hey, this is awesome. So at the HTTP level, you're defining everything for the Nginx instance there, which of course is event-based, not thread-based, which is the big difference between Nginx and Apache. At the server level, it's very much like the virtual host within Apache. And then at the location level, you're looking more at a directory level and what you're working on within there. So the Gzip module can work in any of those levels. You can set it for the entire Nginx process. You can set it for any single virtual host or server location, or you can also set it in the location block for your particular directory. So if you have just an images directory that you want to set, or not images because that's a bad example, it says do not use it for binary content right there in bright green. But if you have a directory that is, say, a lot of HTML content, you could set it just straight for that directory, or you could set the Gzip for the entire server block as well. So at this point, you can go through and turn on within the configuration file the Gzip. It's simply an option with Gzip on. You can choose by MIME type what you want to compress, really straightforward. And then if it's something that you want to use for proxying requests, you can use the Gzip proxy directive. Whoa, that's exciting. We apparently have encountered a problem and need to close. Please hold. Gotta love PowerPoint. I say that ashamedly. Arrange slideshow. Let's pick the current slide. Another way that you can compress information and decrease bandwidth out to a client is by using the image filter module. And you can use this to do image manipulation directly. You can change the sizes of images, you can rotate images, you can crop them, you can make them, you can do all sorts of inline manipulation of images that are in front of you. So as an example here, we're using it in a proxy configuration here within the location block. We're saying that we're proxying to a backend server, and we want to resize the image filter to be 150 pixels by 100. And we're also rotating at 90 degrees. In the event that we can't do this or we don't wish to do it, or something errors, we drop to an empty GIF, which is in the empty location block. Pretty straightforward again, really nifty little module, quick and easy kind of things to decrease what you are sending out over the wire. Of course, the big question is, why do we want to decrease this over the wire? And during this moment, I get to say, because some of us aren't on fat pipes all the time. Mobile, another perfectly good example why you would want to do this. And within a location block, you can do all sorts of further manipulation, such as if it's from a particular type of device or if it's going over a particular type of connection. You can make sure that you are sizing things appropriately and delivering the content as rapidly as you need. The big challenge is, of course, that we're all getting more and more impatient about networks and such. So as someone who does a lot of flying, watching websites over a go-go internet connection on an airplane is roughly like trying to look at YouTube through a drinking straw. So being able to size things and get content to your end users as quickly as possible is obvious. Here are statistics saying that we've gone from demanding things in 10 seconds before we abandoned them in 97, which was still pretty aggressive in 97, down to 3 seconds in 2010, and if I'm a leading indicator, it's going to be a lot smaller sooner. So we know that we want content to get through to our end users as quickly as possible. And with the Gzip compression and the image resampling, the Gzip compression, most clients can unzip things just fine. It's seamless, transparent, and with image resampling, you can manipulate based on what you're sending whom, what you want them to see.
Compression, does that, obviously you can do that on the fly, but can they be pre-compressed as well?
I believe so. I'm not positive, I would have to look that up, but I believe they can. Second thing is stopping brute force retries. So password attacks and form spamming and let's see, what other options? Oh, search engine robots are another example of things that very much look like brute force to your website. And in spaces where you want to continue to deliver optimum performance to any interactive user, you may want to control what these bots are doing or these automated attacks are doing. So you can use the limit request module to do this. And it gives you control of request processing rates. You can set this a bunch of different ways and in a lot of different contexts. So within the context, using this in the specific sense of HTTP server and location contexts, this can be set at any of those. And in this, you have you define let me just go to the next slide. You define a memory zone, generally in the HTTP context, that gives you a little memory allocation in order to keep track of who and what IP are actually making how many connections per second. And in this case, we're setting a 10 meg memory zone, and we're limiting the rate to 1 request per second. If you wanted to do less than that, you can actually set it on a per minute basis. So if you wanted half a request per second, you wouldn't put in 0.5, you'd put in 30 requests per minute. But in this case, we're saying any address, because the binary remote address is the address the request comes from. It's an internal variable. And at this point, we say any IP address we want to limit to 1 request per second. And in this case, we want to allow you to set up a little bit of a queue of up to 5, because maybe you actually connected 5 times super quick and you're interactive. But after that burstability of 5 connections, which will get delayed slightly if you choose to leave it at the default, which will say those 5 are slightly delayed. Once you hit that 5 queued, then you actually are getting 503s. On the back end. So if you ask 6 times or 8 times or 100 times with this configuration, it would actually give you an error. But that burst allows you to have a little bit of space. It'll just slow you down. There is a no delay on there that you can add in the limit request so that up to that burstable number would see no delay. But once you hit that burstable number, then you start getting errors. So another way this can be used, which I didn't put in the slides, is you can have additional different Zones, so this zone is called 1. Say I wanted to have a zone called search crawlers. I could have a zone called search crawlers and actually make use of the geo module to define a set of IPs that I know are Google search crawlers and Yahoo search crawlers and my own internal search crawlers. And so those could have a much higher rate before they start being slowed, or they could be handled differently. They could potentially be routed to another set of servers. All of this goes back to that intelligence in the layer 7 routing that Nginx is used for.
Is that generating a zone for every address, or is that just...
That is one zone, and the variable that is the key on it is the binary remote address. Yeah. Yep. And then it just tracks the number of connections at that address in that memory zone. Yep.
Question on this.
Mm-hmm.
Is this like a fairly standard setup, or would it be more granular, like the more requests you get, the slower it gets?
So I don't know of a way to do a back off so that if you are sending me 100 requests, then I'm more aggressively offensive to you or offending you than if you had only sent me 5.
So like I guess what I'm saying is like 5 would be no reduction. The next 5 would be a smaller reduction.
Right.
The next 5 would be a more
right.
reduction.
By the time you get to 200, we're just going. Yeah. There's not, as far as I know, a back off that way. But you could. Trying to think if I know a way to do that. There might be a way to do something like that in the scripting languages, because we also have, for example, modules like Lua that you can do a lot of really interesting things with. I haven't tried to play with that one. But it might be a really neat way to extend this. So I will look into it. Any other questions on that one? No? So the third thing that I think you don't know about is how to actually protect Apache from thread exhaustion. So as I mentioned, Nginx is event-based and Apache is thread-based. So if someone decides they want to kill your Apache server, all they have to do is open a pile of connections and keep them open, asking for stupid things. Head. I would like the headers of that particular HTML file. I would like, hey, we're just going to keep this open, especially if you have keep alive on. So most specifically, if you have keep alive on. So one of the ways that Nginx has been used in a lot of cases, instead of a rip and replace to improve your Apache server, you can put it in front of Apache as a proxy that will do some protection against some of these thread exhaustion things. It also works, since we do a lot of caching within Nginx, you can use it as a cache in front of Nginx, and it works very similarly. So specifically, slow Loris and keep it dead, or oops, I got onto the front page of Hacker News, which used to be called getting slashdotted. But I may be showing my age there. So what is thread exhaustion? Basically, you have too many clients making too many requests, opening these HTTP processes. Every Apache connection request spawns another HTTP process. Once you've run out of spares in your spare pool, we start having to actually create them, and that slows everything down, which limits your concurrency because you've also set a certain high water threshold of concurrency, so that you don't, in fact, completely exhaust the memory and not be able to get into your server, which now has a load of 210. So when you see thread exhaustion happening, when you're on Hacker News, when you've been, mentioned on Jon Stewart, these sorts of things happen when you have Apache. No, I've never had that happen before. Actually, Oprah was terrible just back when she was on. Man, if she ever mentioned a URL, it was awful. But Nginx mitigates this by functionally opening all of those, keeping all of those connections open at the Nginx side. It's event-based. We see a nice flat use. We have our our master process and a series of worker processes, but we don't actually open a new thread for each request. So we Nginx are only asking the Apache server behind it for data that we don't have cached, or we keep those connections alive as a proxy through to the Apache server. So you have a very minimal number of connections open to Apache, thus protecting it from these thread exhaustion attacks.
So it's pretty obvious that the
Obamacare sign-up website was not using Nginx.
And at one point, we had a slide that referenced them, but we've decided to take that out of the decks. Just to be kind and gracious.
What was Nginx written in?
Nginx is written in C. Yep. So the fourth thing that I was going to touch on is rewriting content inline. So a couple of you said, yes, you do this, right? You do. We got a couple takers. For what? I'm curious about use cases.
I did it to mess with my coworkers.
Good. Number one use, trolling. Check. Okay. Beyond the trolling use case, which really in almost any technology group should be the first use case for any new tech. Huh? You? Inserting salts into sessions. Oh, that's way more useful than the example I gave. Cool. Okay.
We were using it to rewrite session variables into.
Rewriting session variables, yeah. I'm repeating it so that we pick it up on the mic. So I used a much more mundane example, so we'll get there in a moment. But you can use these inline substitutions for any content that's going through Nginx, and you can rewrite it using variables and all sorts of nifty different regexes, important stuff. The directives, again, can be used in any of the different contexts, and you have a couple of different things that you need to pay attention to. Subfilter once is the default, so it will only look for the first occurrence of whatever you are actually tracking. This is like, your substitutions in VI. You've got to remember to tell it to do the whole file or the whole line. You've got the substitution filter and then the filter types. So my example was really kind of bland. I said that we are going to turn on we're going to turn off the subfilter once, so that we are changing this every time we see the variable __ copyright _date __, so that those hateful things that drive me nuts every time I see them on a website that says copyright 2011, it's not 2011 anymore. You can instead just use a variable. In this case, I used the variable copyright date to make a substitution within the actual content that you would see in the HTML content, so that each year you make one change in your Nginx configuration, and now you've got your copyrights updated everywhere. You can make the substitution type filters on different types. In this case, I set it to text HTML. It's any MIME type. Some of the binary ones I would think would be really bad to do it on, but but there's all sorts of interesting ways to use this. The salting and the sessions are interesting ones. I haven't thought those through. I went with the simple and easy one for this. The fifth thing that I thought you all should know about is online binary updates and configuration changes. So you can do both of these. You can put in a new version and/or a new configuration without dropping a single session, which is pretty nifty. I don't know of anything that doesn't. I know of very few things that don't require near full restarts when you do an actual upgrade. So the configuration file update is actually super straightforward. It is just a flag to the binary to reload the configuration files. That's about as basic as it gets. Yes, it is really that simple. The binary update's a little more interesting, including PowerPoint. The binary update is a little more interesting in that we restart PowerPoint. Binary update includes first replacing the binary. This would be the update portion. So if you compile your own binaries, you would compile it as you normally do and then actually move the binary into place. If you use a package, you could use a package manager to update it. Pretty straightforward. But once you actually have replaced the binary, the we have set this up so that you can use a user signal to actually tell the binary that you want to restart it. And in this case, since we've updated the binary and we are now running a second binary, a different binary, you will end up with something that looks a lot more like this. So the original binary, 1991, which we sent the user 2 signal to, has its master process and its 2 worker processes there, and my grep, of course, finding it. But once we sent the user 2 signal, we've started a second binary, the new binary process here. So we are now running 2 Nginx's, but the first one is actually still receiving connections at this point. So you want to send a winch signal to the first process, which is another, I believe, user-defined signal, because I couldn't find many references to a winch signal other than for Nginx on the web. But this actually tells the process to gracefully close its connections and exit all of the existing connections, and all of the new connections at this point are going to the new process. The nice thing, or another nice thing, other than just the fact we've now sent all of our new connections to the second new process on the new binary, is you have an opportunity right here and right now between the winch and the kill quit, wherein you can say, no, I didn't mean to. Hold up. I lied. This didn't work as I expected. You get a couple of minutes, or you get whatever time you want to take in that space, to verify that the new binary is behaving as you expect it to, and that you have all the pieces you need. And then at that point, you could say it's not working, right? Oh God, it's terrible, we need to revert. You can roll back at this point, which is really nice. You can actually, if we want to roll back, you can put the old binary back in place, and you can send a kill hup to 1991 again, and it will restart, begin taking connections again, and it will roll back to the old binary version. If things are great, fancy, shiny, everything works as expected, you can kill quit 1991, and you're running off of the new binary configuration. So all of this, again, without dropping any existing user connections, unless, of course, the new binary was bad. Yes?
Question. If you're waiting to, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it, is if it's not production quite yet, then how do you get connections to it to test that you're...
So as soon as you say, one more, kill user 2, the new connections are coming into the new binary. You still have existing connections to the old binary. So then we have, our new connections are all coming in and asking here. The old connections that had been connected are still talking to this until you give the winch command. And are valid. Once you give the winch command, it's the old binary. It says, okay, I'm closing everything out, all of the existing connections. As soon as you're done with the thing you're doing now, we will go ahead and move on to the next. We will move you to the new binary. So it's between those two the things, yeah. And then, yeah, so you're getting new connections as soon as you say user 2. But the winch command is what tells the old binary to actually close out the open connections that it has, and do it gracefully. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned the client side, so this plays nice with fast CGI backends and proxy connections and all the other
It does.
things on the other side?
It does. Everything actually connects up cleanly. Yep. More.
So what was actually launching the binary? Did you launch the binary beforehand, or did the user 2?
It was actually the user 2 on 1991, which relaunches.
So it uses the same path and environmental variables as the same environment as the other one.
Yep. It launches the new binary because when you say kill user 2 to 1991, it checks its binary. It says I don't match. Launch the new one.
And so if you send a signal without a new binary, you just say, okay, you don't know what you're doing. I'm just going to continue working.
Yup. Okay. Hey, I'm still here. Cool. Yep. More questions? Yes.
Yeah, one more. So if you are doing this and you have a long-lived client connection, what client connection that was talking to the original binary?
Well, it's
Does
some.
it actually hand it off at some point?
I don't believe it does. It will try to gracefully close it, and if you are forcing it open somehow, then it will have to at some point, when you do go back and say, no, really, kill my 1991, it will close it, and that new connection will be recreated. Others? This is a fun one. Subtleties? Cool. So now we're on to our bonus level, which means that I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, or you guys have had fewer questions. So the bonus level is that if you actually send the command -v, or the flag -v, to the Nginx binary that you have, it will give you a nearly complete configuration script for compiling. I had to truncate mine because it didn't fit on the slide, so that's why we have the -- etc. there. But my Nginx -v gives me all of my configure arguments. So if you are out compiling, or you're wondering if the Nginx version you're running actually has a particular module compiled into it, something like that, you can take a look at exactly what the configuration arguments are. It's not cut and paste, but it's pretty darn close. So that leads me to all sorts of more resources. We know that Nginx is still something that is very much written and used by people who are diehards in this space. We're writing a lot of content right now around more solution-oriented kind of content, as opposed to you need to go RTFM, and you need to RTFM and a very engineering-focused technical manual. So that's a lot of the stuff we're working on now. We spent a lot of time on the blog on Nginx, as well as more solutions architecture sort of papers and documents out there, where this is part of why we formed a company as well, is to try to make this not only having the best possible web acceleration server that we have already from the amazing Russian engineers, but also to make it more accessible to people who don't speak Russian, and who aren't necessarily the hardcore C engineers. So we've got the blog, which is new in the last 6 months. We've started running webinars regularly, and we are happy to talk to you about the open source project as well as our commercial project. So I am Sarah Novotny, and I do actually work for Nginx. But if you have more questions, we've got another 10 minutes or so. So yes, questions. Yes, sir.
Are you or is anyone from your company available for consulting?
Yes, we have support and services as well now. So we'll trade paper later. Yeah. Other than support and services questions, because I'm not actually pitching, because this is an open source conference. Look at me not pitch. More questions? You all use it, love it, you don't have any questions? It does all the things you want, include make breakfast.
Well, the intro's tomorrow.
Well, the intro is tomorrow, that's true. Which, yeah, 1 second and I'll tell a little bit about the intro class. And then, so tomorrow is Nginx 101, which is going to cover some installs, some basic configuration for static files, static file delivery, some basic proxy, and a basic load balancer as well. And we'll go through the configurations for those. And I probably won't be doing it on the fly at the command line, but I will have code snippets. And you'll be up one after him. Yes?
My question is about that. Will you cover basic security concerning configuration? Because I know, like, some people use the default config and actually leave arbitrary PHP execution stuff open.
How about I add a slide or two about that? I will do what I can to cover some basic security stuff around Nginx as well tomorrow. Okay, yes?
It's more of a general question. We use UWSGI quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at UWSGI docs, and it's like everything application sync. And as you're saying, okay, here are the 5 things that Nginx can do.
Right.
I'm wondering if there are overlaps between the 2 things and comparative advantages or disadvantages, especially where you're chaining one up in front of the others.
Right. So we generally expect that your application server, which I'm trying to get back to, sits behind an Nginx proxy that will do routing and, where do we go? One more. There we go. That will do layer 7 routing, intelligent stuff, but we expect that your application, whether it's fast CGI, UWSGI, Java, Passenger, Tomcat, whatever, lives there, and the Nginx front end is actually doing the routing that says, hey, this is a .php, or hey, this actually is just static, so it would go over here. We believe we are faster and better at doing that routing and being able to deliver the content that isn't necessary or that doesn't require the application server. So that's why we recommend putting us in front of it. But depending on your need for concurrency, which is usually where it stands, that using the heavier weight application server to serve everything works fine. Same argument is made for Apache as well. Apache will do everything and the kitchen sink. We just think that we can do the lighter weight stuff faster and then route graciously to the heavier weight spaces where they need it. So we have a customer right now that just wrote up a post on the web about, and actually gave a talk at our user summit, about getting to 100,000 concurrent connections on a single machine. And only passing through what was necessary to the back-end application servers. So being able to run 100,000 concurrent connections against any modern application server wouldn't really work on a single piece of hardware. So, or not that I've ever run into. Yeah, one more. Oh.
That said, what can you say about caching and where that usually has to go to the more heavy back-end server?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to do that with Nginx, or does that require kind of spaghetti tie-ins?
No, you can do caching. You can cache application server responses because, for example, the front page of an e-commerce site that says, hello, Sarah, my name is not going to change in the next 10 minutes of this session. So we should be able to cache that sort of hello, Sarah thing. So there are ways to set up Nginx to do caching in front of application servers and setting up the application or the cache to understand that this is based on a session or this is based on some other smart piece of information.
How common is it to use Nginx with Node.js?
I don't have a good answer. I would say it's pretty common.
Extraordinarily common.
Yeah. Ryan Dahl, when he sort of presented this is Node.js, actually did some great graphs about how Nginx has a flat memory consumption with concurrency in Apache. So I think that the Node community went, oh, Nginx works fine with that. But I don't have numbers on it. Extraordinarily common, though. Other questions? Yes?
What about SSL? I haven't used
So, let me tell you about our kitchen sink. So we do a lot of stuff that does application acceleration, and that includes SSL termination. And with this last release, we now can actually encrypt also through to the back end cleanly. So we can encrypt. So before we could do the termination and encrypt out to the client and would presume a safe backend, and now we can do an encryption all the way through to the backend as well. So we'll do SSL termination and SSL acceleration as an endpoint. When I say we are an application accelerator, we are looking at that layer 7 routing, that edge of the network that used to exist in hardware. So the F5, the Riverbed, the Zeus, the SSL accelerators and terminators, all of that stuff that used to exist in hardware, we're trying to move into Nginx as a software solution as we see most of tech moving away from owning and running your entire network soup to nuts as we move to the cloud and commoditized utility compute. More? Yes?
So I have a toy minimalist web server that doesn't even send like content link headers.
Okay.
Because it's not required, even though everybody uses it. Will Nginx proxying that be minimalist as well, or will it be sending more stuff?
I don't know. Would we send through only what you sent us, or would we add headers that we expect to be the default?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to look.
Depends.
Depends.
If you're gzipping, then it gzips.
Yeah, that's true.
Whether or not you're chunking or not.
Yep.
And then different modules can modify the request.
So you can configure it to basically do whatever you want.
Yeah, just,
minimally.
you can have it just queue the connections if you want.
Mhm. Cool.
There you
Thank
go.
you. Toy web servers. Other questions? No? Well,
So
oh,
I
yes.
had one earlier, like on one of the earlier slides.
Okay.
So, you know, to limit the number of requests, is that limiting the number of requests or the number of connections? Because there's a fine distinction.
There is a fine distinction. So when we are doing rate limiting, we are expecting that you are making requests. Now, because we do not have, because we do event-based modeling instead of thread-based modeling, a request is more the unit we use than a connection, because a connection doesn't map to a thread.
So it doesn't really limit connections per se, it's really limiting requests.
But it's limiting requests from an IP. So if the IP remains the same, whether it's a connection or a request, then it is counted.
So what happens when you have multiple connections in the protocol? Do you accept them and then just do nothing? Or do you accept them and end them?
So what will happen in that rate limiting space is you have a little buffer. It's not a buffer, but you have a number of burstable capabilities. So I would let you have 5 or 10 or 200 if you're Google requests. And you will be able to make those requests. They will be slightly slowed. But then if you exceed that number in the amount of time that we have set, so 200 in a second, if you exceed that number, then you will get an error and it will be terminated. So you will get a 503 returned.
So I'm piggybacking on his question.
Sure.
So what you're saying is even if like the same client, same
Mhm.
IP is making 10 different connections
Mhm.
or one connection,
Yep.
it has nothing to do with whether they're getting rate limited or not. It has everything to do with how many requests come in on whatever connections
From that IP.
from that IP or
Mhm.
pool of IPs if
Yep.
you're doing a Google whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
Do you do anything with WebSockets in Nginx?
We do. I don't know a ton about it, though, so we will really rapidly get out of my depth, but we can do WebSocket connections from Nginx to some sort of WebSocket space. We're in the same sort of thing with Speedy, where I really rapidly get out of my depth. So, yeah, both of those I'd be happy to have further conversations, look things up with you, that kind of stuff. Yep. All right, are we good? Thank you all for joining me then.